In the heart of 19th century Bavaria lived a prince who felt out of place in the role the world expected from him. From birth, the people around him believed he would grow into a strong and traditional ruler, someone who would lead soldiers, run a kingdom, and make difficult political choices. But the boy who would later become known as King Ludwig II had dreams that were very different from the strict world of royal duties. He longed for beauty, fantasy, music, and quiet places where imagination could drown out responsibility. While others saw a throne waiting for him, Ludwig saw a world he wished he could escape into, one made of legends, stories, and heroic characters who live far away from the heavy world of politics. King Ludwig II, who later earned the nickname the Fairy Tale King, would go on to build some of Europe's most breathtaking palaces, castles so dramatic and dreamlike that they looked as if they had been lifted from old storybooks. These were not ordinary royal buildings. They were escapes. They were invented worlds shaped by a king who wanted to live inside his imagination. A royal childhood filled with pressure and fantasy. Ludwig was born in 1845 in the large and elegant Nymphenburg Palace, a place filled with wealth, history, and high expectations. As the eldest son of King Maximilian II of Bavaria and Queen Maria of Prussia, he was expected to follow in the footsteps of generations of rulers before him. Everything about his birth suggested power and responsibility, but his early life was far from carefree. His father believed a future king must be serious, disciplined, and prepared. Lessons were strict, manners had to be perfect. Every move was watched by tutors and advisors. Yet, under all of this pressure, young Ludwig developed a vivid inner world that kept him going. Whenever he visited Neuschwanstein Castle, one of his family's residences, he was surrounded by colorful murals of German legends, brave knights, magical forests, mysterious beasts, and heroic adventures. These images lit a spark inside him. While others expected him to grow into a traditional monarch, Ludwig fell deeper into imagination. By the time he was 18, fate changed quickly. In 1864, his father suddenly died. Overnight, Ludwig went from a quiet young man who preferred stories to strategy to the ruler of an entire kingdom. He had barely reached adulthood, and he already carried a weight that even experienced men struggled to bear. The young king, who loved art more than power. Although many people were immediately charmed by the young king, they admired his appearance, his gentle personality, and the mystery that seemed to surround him. Ludwig himself did not desire political power. He found government meetings dull. He disliked arguments among advisors. Debates about taxes, laws, and treaties made him feel trapped. What he did love was art, especially music. Not long after he became king, he summoned one of the most important composers of the time, Richard Wagner. The two connected instantly. The music of Wagner, filled with gods, heroes, ancient myths, and dramatic emotions, became a doorway for Ludwig. In it, he found a reflection of the worlds he imagined as a child. Their friendship changed Ludwig's life. It also shaped the architecture he would later create. Almost every palace and castle he dreamed up was influenced in some way by the stories, themes, and musical scenes created by Wagner. But while Ludwig's artistic side grew brighter, his interest in ruling Bavaria faded. The demands of leadership felt like chains around him. He began to long for places where he could be alone, places where fantasy could replace duty. The search for escape in the Bavarian Alps. The mountains of Bavaria held the kind of beauty that spoke directly to Ludwig's imagination. High peaks touched the sky. Dark forests whispered old stories. Blue lakes reflected the clouds like mirrors. Near the Austrian border, a series of shimmering lakes, especially the Alpsee and Schwansee, captivated him. He dreamed of hiding away in this landscape, far from political pressure, and creating a world of his own. He wanted a refuge, something private, isolated, and entirely built from his imagination. This dream grew stronger after he began visiting two places in 1867, Wartburg Castle in Germany and the Château de Pierrefonds in France. Both were romantic, medieval-style structures that looked as if they belonged in old epics. These visits convinced him. He would build a castle not meant for military use, not meant for government, but meant for fantasy. That dream became Neuschwanstein Castle, a structure so magical, it would later inspire the castle designs of theme parks like Disneyland. Imagining Neuschwanstein, a medieval fantasy brought to life. When Ludwig first described his idea for Neuschwanstein in the late 1860s, he imagined a medieval knight stronghold, but perfect, polished, and filled with artistic detail. He wanted something ancient-looking, but built with the newest technology of his time. To bring this dream into reality, he relied heavily on two designers, Christian Jank, a stage designer who created dramatic artistic sketches, Eduard Riedel, the architect responsible for turning those drawings into real structures. Because Jank came from the world of theater, the castle was designed almost like a giant stage set. Every wall, tower, stairway, and balcony felt grand and dramatic, as if waiting for an opera performance. And that was exactly what Ludwig liked. He did not want a normal palace. He wanted a world where his imagination could feel real. Construction officially began in 1869. Workers laid the first stone on September 5th. Although Ludwig originally planned something smaller, his ideas kept growing. Soon the plans became massive, expensive, and complex. Hundreds of workers were hired. New roads had to be built just to carry materials up the mountain, and Ludwig changed his mind constantly. If something did not look magical enough, he ordered it redesigned. If a detail didn't match his vision, he demanded it be rebuilt. The cost kept rising, but Ludwig cared only about creating beauty, not balancing budgets. A castle of blended styles and endless details. The architecture of Neuschwanstein mixes several styles: Romanesque arches, Gothic towers, Byzantine mosaics, fantasy-inspired murals based on old German legends. The outer walls were built with white limestone, giving the castle a glowing, almost snow-like appearance. Inside, rooms were filled with carved wooden panels, colorful murals, gold decorations, and tapestries that looked like they were woven for kings centuries earlier. Visitors entering the lower courtyard first saw the gatehouse, decorated with red brick and pale yellow stone. Then they climbed into the upper courtyard, where tall towers rose toward the sky. Everything looked grand and heroic. The most famous rooms inside were two massive halls. One, the throne hall. This chamber was decorated like a church from the Byzantine Empire. Gold columns glittered. Bright mosaics covered the walls. A huge chandelier hung overhead, shaped like a crown. But strangely, the throne itself was never finished. An empty platform remains, a symbol often seen as poetic, showing how Ludwig desperately tried to escape royal duty instead of embracing it. 2. The Singers' Hall. This was a tribute to Wagner's operas. The walls displayed stories from German legends, while the stage and gallery were designed for musical performances. Ludwig imagined scenes from operas playing out here, even though he rarely hosted actual events. Expanding the fairy tale. Kingdom, Linderhof Palace. Although Neuschwanstein was still unfinished, Ludwig began building another dream, Linderhof Palace. This project started from a small hunting lodge he inherited from his father, but Ludwig had no interest in keeping it simple. Between 1869 and 1878, he transformed the lodge into a palace inspired by French kings, especially Louis XIV, the Sun King, whom Ludwig admired deeply. Everything about Linderhof celebrated that admiration. Golden symbols of the sun were placed throughout the palace. Rooms glowed with crystal, silk, mirrors, and carved decorations. The design imitated the luxurious French Rococo style. Even though the palace was incredibly ornate, it was surprisingly small. There were only 4 main rooms, but each was packed with detail. Yet the true wonders lay outside. Gardens like scenes from a myth. Landscape designer Karl von Effner created huge gardens around the palace with sculptures representing the seasons, fountain pools, formal terraces like those in Italian gardens, pathways leading into forested hills. The most magical feature was the Venus Grotto, an artificial cave built for Ludwig alone. He used it to recreate scenes from Wagner's operas. Inside the glowing cave, colored lights reflected on a small lake, where Ludwig rode in a shell-shaped boat while musicians played nearby. To him, it was not a cave. It was a doorway into a story. Although King Ludwig VI already had two major projects draining his energy and finances, his imagination refused to stop. Every time he walked through the completed rooms of Linderhof, or looked at the rising towers of Neuschwanstein, he began dreaming of something even grander. His mind drifted to France and the magnificent Palace of Versailles, a place he admired more than almost any other structure in the world. Ludwig believed Versailles represented absolute beauty and royal power at its highest level. Even though he had never been able to tour the palace during his 1867 visit, because he was urgently called back to Bavaria, his fascination only burned brighter. He read about Versailles, studied its architecture, and spent hours imagining what it must feel like to walk through its halls. Soon he decided that if he could not fully experience the original, he would create his own version in Bavaria. And not just a copy, but something even more impressive. This ambition led to the creation of the palace on Herrenchiemsee, an island in the middle of a shimmering lake called the Chiemsee. The island itself already carried centuries of history. It once held a quiet monastery, but when Ludwig acquired the island in 1873, everything changed. He envisioned a place where he could bring his version of Versailles to life. A home meant only for him, where royal splendor existed without political duty. The project began in 1878. As usual, Ludwig supervised every detail. He spent long days reviewing sketches, changing room plans, adjusting designs, and imagining dramatic entrances where he could walk alone, as if he were part of a golden age long gone. The palace that rose from his plans became known as Herrenchiemsee, the last and grandest of all his architectural dreams. Even though he intended it to be far larger, only the central section of Herrenchiemsee was ever completed. Yet even this unfinished portion was breathtaking. The building's exterior looked massive, with long lines of windows, ornate decorations, and stone walls glowing in the sunlight. Everything was designed to give the feeling of power and elegance, just as Versailles had done centuries earlier. Inside, the palace looked like a world made of mirrors, crystal, and polished marble. The most famous room was the Hall of Mirrors, which reflected and re-reflected light until it felt endless, like a tunnel of shimmering glass. Ludwig wanted this hall to outshine even the original in France, and because 2 centuries of technology had passed since Versailles was built, he was able to include modern comforts like heating, running water, and private bathrooms. Herrenchiemsee was designed for one person alone. There were no plans for royal court events, diplomatic gatherings, or public ceremonies. It was a retreat meant purely for imagination, a place where Ludwig could walk surrounded by beauty and pretend that politics and conflict did not exist. The gardens outside the palace were just as impressive. Massive lawns stretched out toward the lake. Rows of statues representing mythological figures stood tall beneath the open sky. Fountains splashed water high into the air, some designed to copy the famous fountains at Versailles. Every corner felt carefully arranged, as if the king expected to step out and see mythical creatures from Wagner's operas wandering the grounds. But while Ludwig was creating these breathtaking spaces, he was also drifting farther away from reality. As the walls of his palaces grew, his connection to the real world weakened. He avoided government meetings. He rarely appeared in public. His ministers and advisors sometimes waited weeks just to see him. Many days he slept during the day and worked by night, taking quiet sleigh rides through the Bavarian countryside long after most people were asleep. There were stories of villagers waking up to find a royal sleigh stopped outside their homes, with Ludwig speaking softly to them about the stars, the moonlight, or the mountains. To the people, these moments felt magical and strange. They began calling him the fairy tale king, a name that captured both their awe and their confusion. The ministers of Bavaria, however, did not see fairy tales. They saw financial chaos. By the mid-1880s, the king's building projects had pushed him into enormous debt. He borrowed money from different sources, and sometimes he made promises he could not keep. His spending seemed unstoppable, and the government feared that Bavaria might collapse financially if he continued. His ministers believed that something had to be done. Instead of confronting him directly, which they feared could lead to anger or refusal, they decided on a more drastic action. In 1886, they secretly prepared documents claiming that Ludwig was mentally unfit to rule. Doctors who had never examined him personally put together medical reports stating that he suffered from insanity. The evidence was weak, and many historians believe it was arranged unfairly, but the ministers pushed forward anyway. On June 10, 1886, a government group traveled to Neuschwanstein to deliver the order removing Ludwig from the throne. But the king had been warned. Guards loyal to him stood at the gates. The officials were turned away at gunpoint. For a moment, Neuschwanstein transformed from a fantasy castle into a real fortress, the king's last attempt to protect himself and the world he had built. But this resistance did not last long. 2 days later, a larger force managed to seize him. Ludwig was taken to Berg Castle, a quiet residence near Lake Starnberg. He was no longer a king in control of a kingdom. He had become a prisoner of the very government he once ruled. On the evening of June 13th, Ludwig went for a walk with his personal doctor, Bernhard von Guden, along the lakeshore. Only the two of them left the building. Hours passed and neither returned. Near nightfall, searchers found both their bodies in shallow water. The official explanation claimed that Ludwig had taken his own life by drowning, and that Guden died trying to stop him. But the story never made complete sense. There was almost no water found in Ludwig's lungs, which raised doubt about drowning. Marks on Guden's body suggested he may have been involved in a struggle. To this day, the events of that night are wrapped in mystery, and people continue to question what truly happened. With Ludwig gone, construction on both Neuschwanstein and Herrenchiemsee stopped immediately. The only palace fully completed during his lifetime was Linderhof. The other projects remained unfinished, frozen exactly as they were when he died. Even though he passed away under dark and confusing circumstances, the legacy he left behind changed Bavaria forever. The buildings he created, once criticized as wasteful, strange, and foolish, became some of the most visited places in Europe. Millions of travelers now walk through the rooms he designed, admiring the same frescoes, sculptures, staircases, and views he dreamed of long ago. Neuschwanstein, in particular, grew into a symbol recognized worldwide. Its tall towers and white walls inspired the castle design for Sleeping Beauty in Disney's early animations. Artists, architects, writers, and dreamers from all over the globe have looked at Ludwig's castles and felt something magical awaken inside them. Over the years, people began seeing him not as a madman or a failed ruler, but as a visionary, someone who created beauty during a time of pressure and responsibility. His life was filled with contradictions. He was a king who hated politics, a ruler who preferred silence and moonlight over crowds and celebrations, a man who built castles not for power, but for imagination. And perhaps that is why his story still fascinates people today. His creations remind us that even in a world of strict rules and heavy expectations, one person's dreams can leave a mark that lasts for centuries. Even after his tragic death, the world slowly began to understand what King Ludwig II had tried to create. At first, many people, including his own ministers, saw his palaces as proof that he was wasteful or disconnected from his responsibilities. They believed his castles were nothing more than expensive fantasies that had drained Bavaria's money. But after his death, something unexpected began to happen. The same palaces that were once mocked and criticized turned into treasures that millions wanted to see. Families from across Germany started taking trips to Neuschwanstein soon after it opened to the public. Travelers were stunned by the sight of a castle rising above the mountains, like something out of a dream. Visitors walked through the gates and felt as though they had stepped into a story. Every window revealed views of lakes, forests, and cliffs. Every room was filled with artwork celebrating myths, legends, and ancient heroes. People began to realize that Ludwig had not built a palace for power. He had built a place for wonder. Neuschwanstein became so famous that it shaped how the world imagined fairy tale castles. When artists worked on early animated movies, they used Ludwig's creation as their model. When theme parks wanted to design castles that appealed to children and adults, they looked at the glowing white walls and soaring towers of Neuschwanstein. The mountain castle became a universal symbol of fantasy, even for people who had never heard of Ludwig himself. As tourists explored the inside of the castle, they began learning more about the man who created it. They discovered that Ludwig designed every detail with deep meaning. The murals showing ancient German legends were not chosen randomly. They reflected stories he loved since childhood. tales of loyalty, bravery, sacrifice, and magic. The carved wooden panels, silk tapestries, and golden decorations showed how much care he put into shaping an imaginary world that felt real enough to touch. Even rooms that were never finished had their own atmosphere. Construction stopped immediately after Ludwig's death, leaving empty spaces filled with scaffolding, unfinished walls, or half-built decorations. These areas reminded visitors that Neuschwanstein was a dream interrupted. They made people wonder what the castle might have looked like if the king had lived long enough to complete his plans. While Neuschwanstein grew in fame, Linderhof began attracting visitors for a completely different reason. Unlike the mountain castle with its towering walls, Linderhof was intimate, quiet, and almost glowing with gold. People felt as though they were walking into a tiny palace made entirely for one man's imagination. The small size allowed visitors to feel closer to Ludwig, as if they were stepping directly into his private world. One of the most talked about features at Linderhof was the Venus Grotto, the artificial cave built for the king's private opera scenes. Tourists were amazed to learn that Ludwig had ordered special lighting effects, including colored lights that could change the cave from blue to red to purple. Guides explained how musicians once played Wagner's music, while the king floated on the artificial lake inside the cave, imagining scenes from operas brought to life around him. To many visitors, it became clear that Ludwig had not simply built a cave. He had built a place where imagination could become an experience. The exotic additions to the Linderhof grounds also surprised many travelers. The Moorish kiosk and the Moroccan house, both brought from international exhibitions, added a feeling of distant cultures and faraway stories. Visitors often commented that walking through the palace grounds felt like stepping through different parts of the world without ever leaving Bavaria. They began to appreciate the king's ability to blend cultures, art styles, and time periods into one landscape that made sense only in the world of Ludwig. While Neuschwanstein and Linderhof grew popular, Herrenchiemsee also began attracting large crowds. Though unfinished, the sections that existed were spectacular. The long hallways, giant staircases, and reflective surfaces made people feel as though they had stepped into a painting. The Hall of Mirrors at Herrenchiemsee often left visitors speechless. Endless reflections created a sense of space that seemed almost impossible. Some said it felt like the room stretched into eternity. Others said it felt as though the walls themselves were made of light. Visitors learned that, although the palace was meant to honor Louis XIV of France, it actually revealed more about Ludwig's loneliness and desire for beauty. Because the palace was designed as a private retreat, people began imagining how the king might have walked through the empty halls late at night, surrounded only by candlelight and his own thoughts. They pictured him eating alone at his special dining table, which could rise through the floor from the kitchen below. The idea that a king built such luxurious rooms only to enjoy them in solitude fascinated people. As time passed, the story of Ludwig's downfall became as famous as his buildings. Historians argued over whether he was truly unfit to rule or whether he had been treated unfairly by his ministers. Some believed he was overwhelmed by stress and responsibility. Others thought he suffered from depression or mental illness. Many people, however, believed that the accusations against him were exaggerated or even false. They suggested that the ministers removed him because they feared his spending, not because they cared about his health. The mysterious circumstances of Ludwig's death only made his story more compelling. Visitors stood at Lake Starnberg and wondered what really happened that night. Some believed the official explanation. Others thought the king had been murdered. Many pointed out the strange details, the lack of water in his lungs, the injuries on Dr. Gudden, and the fact that no one saw exactly what happened. Questions surrounded the event like fog, and the truth seemed impossible to grasp. As the 20th century progressed, artists, writers, filmmakers, and scholars became deeply interested in Ludwig II. They admired his creativity, his imagination, and the emotional depth behind his architectural dreams. They created movies, books, plays, and documentaries exploring his life, trying to understand a man who built castles that seemed to stand outside of time. Some portrayed him as a tragic hero. Others described him as a visionary ahead of his era. A few still depicted him as eccentric or troubled, but even those views often came with a sense of empathy. People began to see that Ludwig was shaped by a lifetime of pressure. From childhood, he was trained to lead a kingdom, yet he never felt comfortable with power. He lived in a world where every move was watched, every word judged, and every decision weighed heavily. Instead of finding peace in his role, he found it in imagination. And instead of finding joy in politics, he found it in art. When modern visitors walk through his palaces, many sense the same emotional conflict. The glittering halls, dramatic murals, and towering walls seem to hide a quiet sadness beneath their beauty. They reveal a king who wanted to escape into worlds where he could live freely. A man who felt too deeply, dreamed too wildly, and built too boldly for the world he lived in. Today, the castles left behind by King Ludwig II are not symbols of madness. They are symbols of artistry and courage. They remind people that creative minds often face misunderstanding. They show that imagination can survive even when it is criticized or feared. And they prove that dreams, especially the unusual ones, can leave something behind that touches millions. Neuschwanstein continues to stand above the mountains, glowing in the sunlight and rising above the clouds. Linderhof remains a jewel of gold and Rococo design, shining quietly in its valley. Herrenchiemsee still stretches across its island, unfinished yet proud, a tribute to a king's determination to bring beauty into the world. Even though Ludwig's life ended in tragedy, his creations continue to live in a way he could never have imagined. Travelers from all over the world visit them every year. Families take photos in front of the towers. Children stare up at the murals with wide eyes. Artists sketch the walls and ceilings. Historians explain his life to new generations. For many people, King Ludwig II is no longer remembered as a ruler who failed at politics. He is remembered as a dreamer, a man who built the impossible and left behind a fairy tale world that continues to inspire awe. His castles have outlasted the criticisms, the debts, the political conflicts, and the misunderstandings. They have erased the idea that he was a mad king and replaced it with the idea that he was a visionary, someone who believed that a world full of hardship deserved places filled with magic and beauty. His story reminds us that some people are not meant to be leaders in the traditional sense. Some are meant to show the world something different, something breathtaking, something unforgettable. After the death of King Ludwig II, Bavaria changed in a way that no one could have predicted. The government that once complained about his spending suddenly realized that the palaces he created were becoming valuable treasures. What had been a burden during his life became a source of pride afterward. Tourists from nearby towns, distant cities, and even other countries traveled to see the places that the king had built in isolation. The same ministers who tried to remove him now relied on his creations as cultural and economic landmarks. Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Herrenchiemsee each developed their own identities. They told different parts of Ludwig's personality, almost as if each palace captured a piece of his soul. People who walked through these castles felt like they were walking through the dreams of someone who never had the chance to explain himself fully. Neuschwanstein stood for his imagination. Linderhof represented his love of art and elegance. Herrenchiemsee expressed his admiration for absolute beauty and royal power. As more visitors arrived, each palace turned into a window into Ludwig's hidden life. Scholars and historians studied the details he left behind. They found letters, drawings, and notes where Ludwig explained how he imagined certain scenes, how he pictured the mountains at sunset from the highest balcony, or how he wanted the light to hit the mosaics in the throne hall. Every page revealed a man who cared deeply about creating beauty because he believed beauty was one of the few things that made life meaningful. Even though he struggled with loneliness and political pressure, Ludwig poured all his energy into his projects. That energy didn't disappear after he died. It remained in his walls, his decorations, and his designs. Tourists who walked through Neuschwanstein often noticed how different rooms felt like chapters in a story. Every mural, every archway, every carved figure told part of a legend that Ludwig cherished. The throne room, with its gold columns and shimmering floor, made people feel as though they were stepping into a kingdom ruled by myth instead of reality. The unfinished rooms with rough walls and exposed wood reminded visitors that the king never had the chance to complete his dream. To many, those incomplete spaces became some of the most emotional parts of the castle. They showed how quickly life can change. They showed how a dream can be interrupted, but still inspire millions. Linderhof, unlike Neuschwanstein, provided a glimpse into Ludwig's more personal side. Because the palace was small and designed only for him, visitors could imagine what his daily life might have felt like. They could picture him sitting at the table that rose from the kitchen through the floor, allowing him to eat without servants watching. They could imagine him wandering alone through the gardens late at night, listening to the sound of fountains mixing with music from the operas he adored. The Venus Grotto at Linderhof left a particularly strong impression on visitors. It represented Ludwig's desire to bring fantasy to life through physical spaces. The glowing, colorful cave wasn't just a room, it was a theater of imagination. People realized that he didn't build palaces simply for show. He built them to escape loneliness, to find comfort, and to create worlds where he didn't have to be the king everyone expected. Herrenchiemsee offered yet another piece of his story. Standing in the Hall of Mirrors, visitors felt a mixture of admiration and sadness. The room was stunning, reflecting lights in endless directions, but its emptiness reminded people that Ludwig built it for himself, alone. He never planned grand parties or celebrations in the space. He never intended for crowds to fill the halls. He wanted to walk through it quietly, imagining past eras of royalty and splendor. The silence of the palace became one of its defining characteristics. Even today, when tourists visit, they often whisper without realizing it. The palace seems to demand quiet, as if it remembers the loneliness of its creator. As the years passed, the story of Ludwig II grew larger. More books were written, more films were made. His life became the subject of debates, discussions, and interpretations. People around the world became fascinated by the idea of a king who preferred dreams to reality. Many found his story relatable, especially artists, musicians, and people who felt trapped by expectations. The more that people learned about Ludwig, the more they understood that his supposed madness was often exaggerated. While he certainly faced emotional struggles, historians pointed out that many rulers throughout history also suffered from pressure, anxiety, and deep loneliness. Ludwig was simply one of the few who tried to escape his responsibilities not through war or cruelty, but through creation. He built palaces instead of prisons. He built beauty instead of destruction. He built worlds for imagination rather than monuments for power. Over time, people began to see him as a tragic figure, a king who dreamed too much in a world that demanded practicality. He imagined stories that were larger than life, but he lived in a political system that required discipline, money, and hard decisions. His desires and his duties were constantly fighting each other, and ultimately, his dreams won. But they won at a cost. Tourists visiting the lake where he died often describe the atmosphere as eerie and heavy. The quiet water, the stillness of the trees, and the knowledge of what happened there created a sense of mystery. Guides explained the different theories about his death. Some believed he drowned himself. Others believed he was murdered. Many believed the truth was somewhere in between. Because of these unanswered questions, Ludwig's last moments remained frozen in history, giving his life an even more dramatic, almost mythical ending. Today, when people talk about King Ludwig II, they focus less on whether he was a good political leader and more on the beauty he left behind. They think about the astonishing ambition behind Neuschwanstein, where every hallway and mural feels like a tribute to stories that shaped his childhood. The castle appears above the forest like a dream made of stone, reminding visitors that imagination can be powerful enough to shape entire landscapes. The private elegance of Linderhof, where gold, crystal, and silk were arranged with astonishing precision. This palace reveals the tender emotional side of Ludwig, the part of him that sought quiet and beauty as a form of comfort in a stressful world. The royal pride of Herrenchiemsee, where Ludwig's admiration for the French Sun King took shape in marble and glass. Even though the palace remained unfinished, it expressed his longing for perfection and his admiration for things far beyond the borders of Bavaria. Each of these palaces, in its own way, tells the world who Ludwig truly was, not a ruler concerned with politics, but a dreamer determined to bring fantasy to life. His legacy looks different depending on who you ask. To some, he was a tragic figure who suffered from isolation. To others, he was a visionary whose artistic passion outshined his weaknesses. To many, he was a gentle soul, trapped inside a role he never wanted. And to millions of people who visit his castles every year, he remains a symbol of wonder, someone who showed that beauty can last, even when power fades. In the end, it was not his laws, political decisions, or government actions that shaped his legacy. It was his imagination. It was his incredible ability to see worlds that did not exist and then build them anyway. His palaces continue to stand because they represent something timeless. They stand for the idea that dreams matter, that beauty matters, that even someone misunderstood in their own lifetime can become a legend in the centuries that follow. Today, tour guides talk about Ludwig not as a mad king, but as a visionary artist. Historians describe him as a complex, sensitive man who struggled under the weight of responsibility, and travelers from every corner of the world walk through his halls with silent admiration. As the sun sets behind the mountains, Neuschwanstein glows with warm colors that make it look almost unreal. The towers appear to rise out of the clouds. The valleys below shine like mirrors. This breathtaking sight reminds people why Ludwig II continues to inspire. His creations allow everyone who visits to step out of reality and into a fairy tale world, just as he once wished he could do. As the 20th century moved forward, the world around King Ludwig II's creations changed dramatically, yet his palaces continued to rise above time. Wars came and went, cities grew and expanded, and modern technology reshaped people's lives. But Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Herrenchiemsee stayed exactly where Ludwig left them, standing like monuments to a dreamer who refused to live within the boundaries of ordinary reality. Even during the most difficult periods of European history, the castles remained symbols of beauty and resilience. When other structures were destroyed or abandoned, Ludwig's palaces survived. People found comfort in their endurance. They represented something pure and untouched: art, imagination, and storytelling in physical form. As tourism grew, these palaces began welcoming millions of visitors each year. People traveled for hours to stand before the white limestone walls of Neuschwanstein, or to wander through the glittering rooms of Linderhof. They came by car, train, bus, and sometimes even on foot through the mountains. The more people visited, the more deeply the world learned about the king who built them. Many modern visitors were surprised to discover how young Ludwig had been when he began his building projects. He was only 18 when he became king, and he was barely into his 30s when construction on all three major palaces was underway. The level of creativity and vision he displayed at such a young age shocked many scholars. They saw him as someone whose imagination had outgrown his time. Neuschwanstein, which would later inspire the world's most famous fairy tale castle designs, became a particularly powerful symbol. It stood in the mountains like something from a dream, unchanged by wind, storms, snow, or time. Its location made it seem even more magical. To reach it, visitors often had to climb steep paths or ride horse-drawn carriages through twisting forest roads. The journey itself made the castle feel like the final destination in an old story. Inside, the murals continued to tell tales of ancient heroes and mystical characters. Even people who didn't know anything about Wagner's operas could feel the emotion behind them. They sensed the same mixture of wonder and longing that Ludwig felt as a child in Hohenschwangau, staring at paintings of knights and legends. The throne hall, with its enormous chandelier shaped like a golden crown, remained one of the most iconic rooms. Visitors often stood silently in the center, gazing at the mosaics beneath their feet and the sparkling decorations above their heads. Many noticed the empty space where the throne was supposed to be. That missing object became a powerful symbol to them, a reminder that Ludwig never fully stepped into the role others wanted for him. It represented a king who avoided power rather than chasing it. Linderhof continued to offer visitors a different experience. Its peaceful valley setting felt like a world separate from the fast-moving modern world. The sound of fountains, the smell of gardens, and the golden glow of the palace felt comforting. The intimate scale of the palace made it easy to imagine Ludwig walking through the rooms alone, perhaps late at night, listening to music or reading letters without anyone to interrupt him. The Venus Grotto remained one of the most unusual attractions in all of Europe. No other king had ever built an artificial cave for private opera fantasies. Inside the dim cave, where colored lights still illuminated the water, visitors could imagine the king drifting in his swan-shaped boat while musicians played. It was a place where emotion and imagination blended into something that felt almost unreal. Herrenchiemsee, meanwhile, gave visitors a sense of awe mixed with sadness. The palace was grander in some ways than its French inspiration. The massive staircases, the marble decorations, and the endless lines of windows looked like they belonged in a story about gods instead of people. But many visitors found themselves struck by the emptiness of the palace. Because it was unfinished, and because Ludwig never meant to share it with anyone, the hallways sometimes felt quiet in a haunting way. Walking through Herrenchiemsee, visitors felt as though they were stepping into a dream that stopped halfway. Rooms suddenly ended in bare walls. Some sections led to nothing at all. The palace was a reminder that dreams, no matter how grand, can be interrupted. Yet, even unfinished, it remained one of the most impressive structures in Europe. As the decades passed, artists, musicians, and filmmakers looked to Ludwig's story for inspiration. To them, he became a perfect symbol of a misunderstood creative soul. They felt connected to his struggle between duty and passion. Some saw him as a romantic figure trapped in the wrong era. Some saw him as a hero of imagination. Others saw him as proof that creativity often comes with sacrifice. Generations of scholars dug deeper into his letters and personal records. They studied his handwriting, the words he used, the emotions he expressed privately. What they found surprised many people. Instead of seeing a man who was out of control, they often found someone thoughtful, sensitive, and overwhelmed. Not irrational, but deeply unhappy in a world that demanded he be something he was not. The debate around whether he was mentally ill continued for many years, but more and more historians began to challenge the claim that he was insane. They pointed out that his ministers had strong political reasons to remove him. They noted that the medical reports used against him were written by doctors who never examined him directly. They explained that other European rulers spent enormous amounts of money on palaces and art, yet were not declared unfit to rule. This growing understanding changed the public's view of Ludwig. He was no longer seen as someone who lost touch with reality, but rather as someone who sought refuge from a world that overwhelmed him. His castles were no longer seen as reckless projects, but as masterpieces created by a man whose imagination was both his gift and his burden. Many visitors began to see themselves in his story. They felt his desire to escape, his longing for beauty, and his discomfort with the responsibilities forced upon him. His life attracted dreamers, artists, writers, and anyone who felt different or misunderstood. To them, Ludwig II became a symbol of courage, the courage to dream in a world that often discourages it. Even the mystery of his death kept people fascinated. Standing at the edge of Lake Starnberg, many tourists felt a shiver run through them. They tried to picture the king walking along the water with Dr. Bernhard von Guden, unaware of what would happen next. They wondered whether someone followed them that night, or whether there was a struggle. They wondered if Ludwig, exhausted and heartbroken, simply could not see a way forward. The unanswered questions made his story feel like a legend, almost as if history itself refused to let him rest. In time, something remarkable happened. The very government that had once removed him came to depend on the legacy he left behind. The castles became some of the most profitable tourist sites in Germany. The money they generated supported museums, cultural projects, and local communities. Hotels, restaurants, and tour companies flourished because of the interest in Ludwig's life. Entire towns grew because of the tourists who came from around the world to see the king's creations. People realized that although Ludwig II had struggled in his lifetime, he had given Bavaria something priceless, beauty that would last forever. Today, Neuschwanstein continues to rise above the forests like a dream that refuses to fade. The castle looks unreal when clouds float around it, making the towers appear as though they are suspended in the sky. Linderhof remains a shining jewel in its valley, glowing warmly against the backdrop of green hills and forests. Herrenchiemsee still reflects sunlight across the lake, its unfinished wings standing as reminders of a dream too large for one lifetime. Visitors from every corner of the world walk through these places, whispering in awe, taking pictures, and imagining the life of the king who built them. They learn about Ludwig's childhood, his struggles, his passions, and his tragic end. They leave with a sense of wonder, because even though Ludwig II did not succeed as a political ruler, he succeeded in creating something far more powerful. He created worlds where stories come alive. He created palaces that make people feel like they have stepped into a fairy tale. He created a legacy that continues to inspire, long after the politics and conflicts of his time have faded away. His life proves that even the most misunderstood people can leave behind the greatest beauty. His castles show that imagination can survive beyond the limits of a single human life. And his story reminds the world that some dreams are too strong to be forgotten. As the modern world entered the digital age, the fascination with King Ludwig II only grew stronger. His palaces, once criticized for being too extravagant or unrealistic, became some of the most photographed and searched for places in Europe. Social media, travel videos, documentaries, and films introduced new generations to the story of the fairy tale king. Young people who had never heard of Bavaria suddenly saw pictures of Neuschwanstein online and became fascinated by the mysterious king who dreamed big enough to build such a place. Neuschwanstein became more than a castle. It became a global icon. Its image appeared on posters, book covers, video games, travel brochures, and currency. People recognized its towers instantly, even if they didn't know the history behind them. The castle's magical appearance turned it into a symbol of fantasy, imagination, and courage. Millions of visitors walked through its halls with amazement, some with tears, others with quiet admiration. Meanwhile, Linderhof continued to glow with its gentle beauty. Visitors compared it to a glittering jewel hidden in a forest. Tour guides explained how Ludwig designed it for total privacy, choosing every piece of decoration with care. Many visitors loved how the palace revealed a personal side of Ludwig, a side that showed he appreciated small moments, quiet settings, and peaceful spaces. They learned how he often spent time alone, reading poetry, listening to music, or dreaming about stories that brought him comfort. Herrenchiemsee, though unfinished, kept attracting people who appreciated its grandeur. Its echoing hallways, grand staircases, and enormous reflecting rooms made visitors feel tiny in comparison. They imagined how Ludwig must have felt walking through these spaces, small, lonely, and lost inside a world too big for one person. Even though the palace never reached the size he planned, it remained a powerful symbol of ambition and yearning. It showed that even unfinished dreams can be unforgettable. At the same time, historians revisited Ludwig's letters, writings, and records to better understand the man behind the palaces. They discovered a king who was thoughtful, artistic, and deeply emotional. His letters to trusted friends revealed a longing for peace and a desire to escape the expectations placed upon him. He often spoke about how heavy the crown felt, even from a young age. His writings showed frustration with politics, confusion about responsibility, and sadness at the lack of true companionship. These discoveries helped change the world's view of him. More people began to see him not as a ruler who failed, but as a sensitive man overwhelmed by a position he never wanted. His story spoke to anyone who ever felt misunderstood, pressured, or trapped by expectations. His life became a reminder that even people who struggle internally can create extraordinary things. Tour guides often explained that Ludwig was not a king of battles or military achievements. He did not conquer lands or pass famous laws. His legacy was built through imagination, beauty, and storytelling. He gave the world spaces that made people feel alive, curious, and inspired. He believed that life needed magic, and he tried to build that magic with stone, glass, and gold. Visitors walking through his palaces often paused in silence, as if they were listening to the echoes of his dreams. They imagined the king standing at a window in Neuschwanstein, watching snow fall on the mountains. They pictured him drifting through the Venus Grotto at Linderhof, surrounded by glowing lights and music. They imagined him staring across the lake at Herrenchiemsee, thinking about the French palace he admired so much. Some of these visitors felt an unexpected emotional connection. They saw themselves in his longing for beauty, his search for comfort, and his desire to escape the pressures of life. The idea that a king, someone who seemed to have everything, could still feel lonely, overwhelmed, or misunderstood, made his story feel human. It reminded people that even those who appear powerful can carry heavy burdens. As society grew more open about discussing mental health, many people revisited Ludwig's struggles with compassion. They understood that creative minds sometimes see the world differently, feel more deeply, and react more intensely. His story fit perfectly into conversations about understanding and empathy. Instead of judging him, the world began to appreciate him. This shift in perspective turned Ludwig II from a controversial figure into a celebrated cultural icon. He became known as a king who created art instead of war, imagination instead of power, and beauty instead of destruction. His palaces, once seen as proof of his failure, became proof of his brilliance. Neuschwanstein remained the brightest example of his legacy. Every year, as the seasons changed, the castle took on different personalities. In summer, it looked like a glowing fortress rising above green hills. In autumn, it appeared surrounded by burning colors of red, orange, and gold. In winter, it became a snow-covered dreamland. In spring, the mountain flowers bloomed around it, making it feel like something out of a fairy tale storybook. One of the most powerful aspects of Neuschwanstein was how it seemed to exist between reality and imagination. It was made of stone, yet it felt like a painting. It was a real building, yet it looked like something that should not exist in the real world. This balance between dream and truth reflected Ludwig's own life, a life lived between fantasy and duty, hope and pressure, beauty and sadness. Linderhof stood as a physical representation of Ludwig's gentler side. The palace showed how simplicity and intimacy could be just as magical as grand towers and marble halls. Its rooms told the story of a king who wanted quiet moments, not large gatherings. Visitors often said that walking through Linderhof felt like walking into the king's heart. Everything felt delicate, peaceful, and safe. Herrenchiemsee stood for the part of Ludwig that dreamed without limits. The palace revealed his desire to create something so magnificent that it could rival one of the greatest symbols of European royalty. Even though he never finished it, the parts he completed were extraordinary enough to show what he was capable of imagining. People admired not just the finished sections, but the vision behind them. As the world continued to change, these palaces became even more important. They reminded people that art and beauty could survive storms, wars, and centuries. They reminded people that imagination had the power to shape history just as much as politics or armies. And they reminded people that some of the most meaningful legacies come from individuals who think differently. The story of King Ludwig II grew into a timeless tale, a tale of a ruler who never found comfort in the throne, but found safety in creating worlds where he could breathe freely. A tale of someone who built castles not to impress crowds, but to escape into a world where dreams mattered more than rules. Today, when visitors leave Bavaria after touring his palaces, many carry a piece of Ludwig's dream with them. Some feel inspired to create art. Some feel encouraged to embrace their imagination. Some feel more sympathy for people who do not fit into traditional expectations. And some feel a deeper appreciation for beauty itself. His impact becomes clear when you see how many people return year after year, bringing family and friends to witness the wonder he created. His story becomes a bridge connecting generations. Children who stare up at Neuschwanstein's towers with glowing eyes, adults who admire the architecture, and elders who appreciate the emotional depth of his life. In the end, King Ludwig II's legacy is not defined by the crown he wore or the throne he left empty. His legacy is defined by the worlds he brought to life. His castles stand as proof that imagination can outlive judgment, that dreams can outlast criticism, and that even a lonely king can create something that touches millions. He may not have been the ruler his advisors wanted, but he became the dreamer the world needed. His story shows that people who think differently often leave the greatest marks on history, not through force or power, but through beauty, creativity, and courage. Neuschwanstein rises like a dream that refuses to fade. Linderhof shines quietly like a golden memory. Herrenchiemsee stands with proud walls, honoring the dream that was too large for one lifetime. Together, they create a story that continues to live through every visitor who walks their halls. And so, the life of King Ludwig II becomes more than history. It becomes a reminder that imagination is not weakness, Fantasy is not foolishness. Dreams are not mistakes. They are the things that live on long after we are gone. They are the things that turn ordinary lives into legends. They are the things that make a fairy tale king unforgettable.